This is the third part for the lecture for week 5 of CM 502, dealing with the church governance system. We're going to talk now about rules for effective boards. Churches tend to have lots of meetings. There are probably more than are necessary, and many of which are not very productive. And as a result, many people grow to dislike meetings despite the fact that they're absolutely necessary for the smooth running leadership teams. So what's the problem with meetings? Well, here's some answers. Number one, there is no clear agenda for the meeting. This is often because there is not a detailed agenda which includes a clear list of action items. Action items should always be prepared in advance by the person or group proposing the action, along with the detailed rationale for that action. Secondly, people who do not come prepared. Part of this grows from the lack of agenda available in advance or from minutes and reports that are distributed at the meeting but not before the meeting. People tend to forget or to procrastinate. An agenda and minutes are important reminders to them of the responsibility that they have. Number 3, meetings do not start on time and waste time. When you start late, you only reward those who are late and frustrate those who are on time. In meetings, we discuss things not on the agenda. We try to make decisions as a group because the subgroup has not done its homework in advance. Number 4, people are reluctant to make decisions. A leadership group is a decision-making body. Don't abdicate the decision to someone else. Also remember that timing is everything, and too often we delay and delay until the decision is no longer necessary or has developed added complications which have not been considered, which means you need to go back to number 1 for the remedy. Number 5, too much time is spent reporting what has been done and too little on what is going to be or needs to be done. I think this speaks for itself. And number 6, people in the meeting do not speak up when they need to. This often requires revisiting the decision later or results in decisions being made that people are not really on board with, and that is not helpful. A good part of productive meetings has to do with the planning. And planning for meetings begin with the previous meeting, with these things being settled before that meeting is ended. Number 1, accurate minutes, circulated promptly, listing actions taken and items deferred until the next meeting. Number 2, assignments made by the chairman with clarification of what is expected for the next meeting and who is responsible to prepare for that item. If no one is made responsible, no one will be responsible. If everyone is responsible, no one will be responsible. Deadlines should be set for the completion of those assignments, and where that is going to require subsequent action, deadlines need to be set to give the group at least a week to consider the decisions going to be asked to be made. Number 3, a firm date needs to be set for the next meeting. The agenda, I believe, should be sent out no less than a week before and should include written minutes from commissions and reports from staff. This is in part because not everyone can make a meeting, and so if there are not written reports, people miss information that later on they need but did not get because they were not able to be present at the meeting. That also means you spend a lot of time simply listening to a report without having had time to process it or under the pressure of time not processing it properly. The agenda should include a written and detailed statement of any actions that are coming from old business and a written and detailed statement of any new business being proposed. Why are those 2 planning rules important? Because without information, wise decisions cannot be made. Now note, any new business brought to the council meeting that is not available should, except for emergencies, require this who do not comply with this advance notice should automatically be tabled after introduction. In other words, someone says, I'd like to do this, I'd make this motion that we consider this, and the chairperson will say, we're going to refer this motion to the proper team, staff member, or subcommittee that will then come back with a recommendation. Quite often, councils or boards function as a committee in the whole on details for which very few of them have expertise. And you need to let the people with the expertise do the preliminary work. And then, of course, the whole issue of leading the meeting. The meeting should begin on time. Like I said, late starts, especially when required, because people are not on time, encourage lateness, and I said disrespects those who are on time and who are organized. Number two, the chair should control the meeting. Discussion unrelated to the item of the business meeting discussed should not be permitted and or assigned to a later point in the meeting. Number three, persons who introduce items and ideas that have not first been presented by a proper commission or staff member should be referred to that commission and not taken action on until the next meeting. Otherwise, you take away the commission's responsibility and authority, and you take away that staff member's responsibility as well. Number four, a safe atmosphere should be maintained at all times to allow free and honest discussion. Hybels talks a great deal about the kind of things that we need to not permit in meetings, and I found them very, very helpful. But too often we are just too nice in meetings instead of calling things down that are not done properly or not done fairly, or ways that people are treated with disrespect. Number five, people who violate the operating principles or core values of the church should be challenged by the chair. Bible says somebody has to challenge them. They have to do what we call calling foul. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Number six, in a debate where the chair has a strong opinion, he or she should vacate the chair. Because if he or she does not vacate the chair, then the clarity with which the decisions being made begins to disappear as we see that he is not becoming the impartial arbiter, or the person who's trying to make sure all sides are heard. It sometimes appears that he simply wants an agenda passed and will not brook any disagreement. There are four essential skills, in my estimation, that we need to have. And as I said, agendas are one of them. Please don't bypass an agenda. I think the reasons are clear why they're important. And developing a good agenda that actually says something is important. One of the things that I feel about rather strongly about is that too often in churches in particular, we save the important business for the end of the meeting. The end of the meeting when everybody's tired, when people are in a hurry to get home, when the thoughtfulness of the process is undermined in some way. I believe that what you should do is to create an agenda that first of all gives only the reports necessary to make sure wise decisions are being made, in which case is usually the report of the president, the pastor, and the report of the treasurer. And then you go to what we call the priority agenda items. Those things that either have to come off of old business or a new business that has been properly prepared for, that really require the bulk of time and the priority of attention. Then you go on to reports, which are, as I said, are often simply talking about what has happened in the past to confirm it or affirm it. And you hear from those reports the things that are planned for the future that don't necessarily need an action to be carried out. Board members are expected to be decision makers. In fact, if a person has a trouble making decisions or is uncomfortable with the responsibility of making decisions, they should not be on a board. Elders and pastors, for example, who are not decision makers, begin operating by an incrementalism that erodes the church's vision by draining away its passion and momentum. Because every time we unnecessarily take baby steps when God calls for giant steps, those people who are the true visionaries in the church become more and more discouraged. Wise decision making at its heart involves a critical question posed over and over and over again, and the question is it wise? And we've talked about that before. By this, we simply mean, is it consistent with God's word? Is it consistent with the values that we have in this church? In the church, the end never justifies the means, and therefore the decision that's made must reinforce and affirm the values of the people of God. Now, this does not mean that every decision will be perfect, but it does mean that you will start with the right question, you will come out to the right answer that is more in tune with God's will. Inherent in wise decision-making is a process which we can briefly outline here. Let's put it this way. Number one, bathe the process in prayer. Pray before the meeting, pray during the discussion, and pray before you ever make a decision. And my thought is, if in part of that prayer One of the statements that is made is, if you hear something new from the Lord than we've discussed thus far, let's discuss it before we decide. Number two, look to God's words for principles and applications to the questions at hand. The scriptures don't describe everything or every situation, but often there are principles that do come into play that we must not violate, we must understand, and we must live by. Number three, gather all the information possible. And you need to make sure that it's accurate information, not fake news, if you will. Make sure that you're dealing in fact. I still remember one time when I was in church early in my ministry when I'd been preaching an extended series on singleness, marriage and the family, divorce, remarriage. And one of the men of the church looked at me on the board and said, "Pastor, you may have noticed that there are a number of people who are missing lately." And they basically said that you're talking too much and spending too much time on this topic. And if you, frankly, they're not going to be back until you get over this. And at that point, I looked at him with the audacity of youth and said, "You may suggest to me what I should preach, but you're not permitted to tell me what I do not preach." Besides the fact that many people in this church, including your children, are divorced. And I'm wondering at times if we had not dealt with this more forthrightly earlier, they would not be having these problems. And then one of the council members simply said to the person who was challenging the pastor at this point, "Who besides you? Who besides you?" We need to make sure the decisions are as informed as possible so that the actions are informed as well. Number four, you should always think through all the possible outcomes and their implications. Especially ask if the outcomes support or work against your core values or mission, but think them through as thoroughly as you can. Number five, on major decisions, write a proposal that includes rationale, process, desired outcomes, and goals by which the decision can be measured. This is important for you to do the kind of evaluation that Collins talks about, but it also becomes a tool of communication to the church why this leadership team has made this decision. It will be much easier to support if people understand. People want to know why. You need to have a why. Number six, seek a thorough discussion with the rest of the leadership. Be absolutely certain that the authors who must support and implement it have their questions answered and concerns are being fairly considered, which may mean that you take longer to make a decision in this case because it's a complex situation. Number seven, as I said earlier, pray before the final decision. And number eight, on major issues, determine a level of consensus that must be achieved in order for the decision to be implemented. Rarely in the church is a 51% vote healthy. It probably is impossible to get a 100% vote. In fact, you sometimes want to be suspicious that the decision's been made too easily if it's 100%. But you need to decide, given the level of the decision, how much the congregation or the board has to agree. I do remember that in one church they decided to do a building project, and the church council determined that before they would make a recommendation to the congregation about a building project, which was in the congregation's purview, they said, "We believe that this board has to have at least a 90% agreement with the plan." And when that was achieved, which actually was achieved because they had done their homework on the decision making, then they simply said, "Now, what level of support do we have to have in the congregation to make this go forward? Because we can't do this with a small support." And so that board made the decision that given the nature of the congregation and the importance of the decision, unless the congregation gave them an 80% vote on this issue, they would not let it go forward until they could. In most churches, you need to remember that the elders, for example, are not the only decision makers. So as a caution, I would just remind you that we at times may need to make sure that we are paying attention to the opinion makers who will affect your decision when you're trying to convey it to the congregation. And not to say that they have a veto over what you're trying to do, but to say that it is important that we know what they're going to say and do so that we ensure, or more likely to ensure, the success of the action that we're about to take. Leaders cannot be afraid of opposition. They should always encourage transparency, speaking the truth in love. And often when there is a decision to be made that is challenging to people, it's a highly teachable moment that can strengthen the unity of the body. We've already talked about minutes. It was in my notes for now, but we talked about it earlier. But minutes need to be useful and accurate. And then finally, you have to call fouls. You have operating principles that are important to you. You have core values that you do not violate. You have standards of mission effectiveness that you believe in. And when people try to do anything that undermines any of those things, it's important to challenge it. And sometimes it has to do with their language or their attitude. In one church, we had a person who had come to us from another denomination, but he would have fine Christian skills, and after a number of years, he became a part of the church board. But he never quite bought into the Church of God way of doing things. And I still remember quite often in a debate, he would say to the rest of the council, "You people." And I could just see the rest of the council bristle every time he said it, because it was almost an attack. It was a way of challenging them in a way that frankly was not acceptable. And so one day when he began the expression, "You people," I said, "Stop right there. Tom," I'm making up a name, "are you a member of this council?" "Yes, I am." "Are you part of this team?" "Well, yes." "Then I never want to hear you say 'you people' again. A team is a we, and you're part of that team. Never say 'you people' again." I could see the rest of the board just kind of slide back and smile, and some of them were relieved, and some of the tension they were feeling towards Tom began to dissipate. And Tom actually found himself more effective as a voice in the church council because he had stopped making an unnecessary or inappropriate barrier. It had to do with his language, "you people." That's probably all I have to say for the week. There's a lot more that could be said, and we will talk about more things down the road, but I hope that what you've read this week, what I have posted in the additional websites and so forth, and this lecture will give you some insights into effective ways to help work with the governing body of the church. However, if you have questions that you feel have not been answered for you, would you please email them to me? I can always add them at a later point because I want to make sure that I'm not boring you or burdening you with information that's probably not necessary to you. But on the other hand, providing for the information that will help you be successful as a leader as you practice dealing with the governing body that you're working with. God bless.